Have you ever woken up and felt like your life had quietly drifted off course? You can't quite explain it. There wasn't a single moment when things went wrong, no disaster, no dramatic loss, just a subtle sense that something, somewhere, was lost. An invisible weight you've carried for so long, you forgot what it felt like to be light. This is where Dante begins. Not in fire or glory, not in heaven or hell, but in a forest, alone, confused. He says, "Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest, dark, for the straightforward path had been lost." And maybe that's why this story still speaks to us after 700 years, because every soul knows what it feels like to be lost. The dark forest isn't just a place, it's a state of being, a spiritual forgetting. The moment you realize you've been going through the motions but not truly living, you wake up one day and ask yourself, who am I, really? How did I get here? And more importantly, how do I find my way back? Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in the 14th century, but it was never meant to be just a book. It's a map for the soul. It shows us how to descend into the shadows, how to climb back through the pain, and how to finally return to the light we forgot we carried. This first moment, the dark forest, is where transformation begins. Not when life is perfect, but when it's uncertain. And what's most remarkable is this: Dante doesn't begin his journey alone. He meets a guide, a soul named Virgil, a symbol of reason and wisdom, a voice that speaks not from the outside world, but from within him. Because when you're lost in the forest of forgetting, the first thing that calls to you is memory, the part of you that still remembers the truth. Virgil tells Dante that he must descend, he must walk through hell, not to be punished, but to understand, to bear witness, to confront. And this is where many of us stop. The thought of facing everything we've suppressed, our guilt, our shame, our regrets, is enough to turn us back into the forest. But what Dante understands, and what you may be starting to sense, is this: avoiding the descent doesn't bring peace. It only prolongs the pain. Hell isn't beneath us, it's within us. And so is our healing. But we can't heal what we refuse to see, so Dante takes the first step, and so must we. And here's where the story shifts. Because the Divine Comedy isn't a tale of damnation, it's a love story between the soul and its creator, between the self and its forgotten truth. But like any love story worth telling, it begins with separation. The dark forest is that separation. The moment the soul forgets who it is. The moment you start believing you are only your job, your failures, your pain. Your failures, your pain. And this forgetfulness isn't a flaw. It's part of the journey. Because to remember the light, you must first know the dark. Dante isn't special because he walks through hell. We all do that. What makes him special is that he writes it down. He leaves us a record, a map through the chaos. And the first thing the map tells us is this: being lost is not the end. It's the beginning. Because if you were never lost, you'd never search. And if you never searched, you'd never awaken. Dante's story mirrors ours. We are born, we forget, we get distracted. We chase things that leave us feeling empty. And one day, maybe midlife, maybe later, we wake up in a forest, and something ancient inside us says, "This isn't who I came here to be." That voice is Virgil. That voice is your soul, calling you home. But to get home, you must first go in. Into the darkness, into the shadows, into the parts of yourself you were taught to avoid. But don't worry, you won't be going alone. This series is your guide. Like Virgil, it won't walk the path for you, but it will walk beside you, helping you make sense of what seems senseless, helping you remember what you were never truly meant to forget. The Divine Comedy isn't just a book about the afterlife, it's about this life. It's about your life. So, as we begin this journey together, ask yourself, where is your dark forest? What have you forgotten? And are you ready to remember? Because the path forward begins with a single step, not away from the darkness but into it. Not to be consumed, but to be transformed. And perhaps that's the real miracle of this journey. Not that you escape the forest, but that you finally understand why you were there to begin with. Because the forest itself is sacred ground. The confusion, the longing, the ache, these are not signs of weakness. They are proof that the soul is waking up. When Dante stood in that forest, he stood where all of us must stand eventually. At the edge of choice. The choice to turn back into the comfortable numbness of routine. Or to step forward into the unknown. Into the wilderness of truth. To walk the sacred path back to yourself. So let this be your beginning. Let this be the moment you stop trying to escape the darkness and instead begin to listen to it. Because maybe it's not trying to trap you. Maybe it's trying to teach you. Maybe it's the soul's way of knocking. Not to scare you, but to wake you. And maybe, just maybe, it's leading you home. And here's something else to consider. What if this dark forest isn't a detour, but part of your soul's design? What if the pain you feel, the questions you ask, and the silence you endure are actually sacred instruments, turning your spirit to hear something deeper? We often think of awakening as a sudden burst of clarity, but more often it's a quiet unfolding, a slow remembering, a soft voice whispering beneath the noise, "Come back." You see, Dante's journey starts not with enlightenment, but with confusion. That's the invitation. The discomfort you feel is the sign you've begun. It means your soul is stirring, stretching, reaching for what it once knew but had forgot in order to return stronger. So as you stand at the edge of your own forest, don't look away, look closer. Feel the wind through the trees. Listen to the stillness beneath the fear. There's something here for you, something waiting to be reclaimed. Dante's courage wasn't in having all the answers, it was in being willing to ask the right questions, to walk into the mystery, to trust that even the darkest parts of the journey, light was not only possible, it was inevitable. And so it is for you. You are not lost. You are being called. And if you dare to answer that call, to listen to the whispers beneath the noise, you'll find that what you've been searching for was never far away. It's been within you all along. This is not the end of the road, this is the threshold. So breathe, open your heart, and take the first step into the forest, into the mystery, into the story of your soul. And remember, the forest may be dark, but it is also alive, with echoes of your purpose, waiting for you to listen. Each tree, each shadow, each twist of the path is not here to block you, but to shape you. To shape the you that emerges not broken but whole. Because this is more than Dante's story. This is yours. And the journey is just beginning. Dante, no longer paralyzed by the fear and confusion of the dark forest, now follows his guide, Virgil, toward the entrance of something unimaginable. The Inferno. Not a place of fire and pitchforks as popular culture often portrays. No, Dante's hell is precise, structured, layered like an ancient spiral staircase carved into the soul. But before he even takes a step into that descent, there is a threshold. An inscription above a gate, words not meant to scare but to prepare. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Let's pause there, because those words aren't a curse, they're a key. They don't mean give up on everything, they mean let go of the hope that things will last. They mean let go of the hope that things will stay the same. Let go of the illusion that you can heal without changing. Let go of the fantasy that awakening doesn't cost something. To truly begin transformation, you must abandon the kind of hope that clings, and instead make space for a deeper kind of hope, one rooted in truth, not comfort. Not the hope that things will be easy, but the hope that no matter how dark, there is a path through. A hope forged in the fire of knowing, not wishing. The descent into hell isn't a punishment, it's a purification. And in Dante's world, the Inferno is not chaos, it's order. Every soul is placed exactly where it belongs, according to the choices they made in life. The first souls Dante encounters are not even in hell proper. They are the neutrals, those who refused to choose good or evil, who lived without conviction, who stood for nothing. Their punishment? They chase a blank banner for eternity, stung by insects, running in circles. It's not about fire, it's about meaninglessness. And here Dante delivers a powerful insight. Even indifference has a consequence. In life, when we numb ourselves, avoid our calling, or refuse to act out of fear, we may think we are avoiding hell, but in truth, we are already building it. Every soul Dante meets in the Inferno is a mirror, not of monsters, but of humanity, of us. These are people who could not let go of greed, lust, pride, rage, and now they are frozen in the very energies they once indulged. It's poetic, but it's also deeply psychological. Because what Dante is really saying is this: hell is the mind turned against itself. Each circle he descends through is a deeper layer of the psyche, a deeper confrontation with shadow. And Virgil? He's not just a character, he's the voice of reason, of higher knowledge. The part of us that says, look, don't run, witness, learn. In the second circle, Dante meets those who were overcome by lust. They are tossed in a never-ending storm, swept away by desire, unable to anchor. Here he sees Paolo and Francesca, lovers caught in an affair. Their story moves him to tears. This is key. Dante does not hate the damned, he weeps for them. He sees himself in them, because this journey is not about judgment, it's about recognition. And perhaps that's the hardest part. To see yourself in the sinner, to realize that you too have let desire carry you away, that you too have justified actions with emotion. But that's the work, that's the descent. It isn't about shame, it's about honesty. In the third circle, Dante walks through endless rain, cold, filthy, unrelenting. Here are the gluttons, those who lived only for pleasure. Now they lie in the mud, tormented by Cerberus, the three-headed beast of hunger. Again, not fire, not pitchforks, but symbolism, because the soul that only seeks to consume will eventually drown in its own emptiness. Each layer of the Inferno is like peeling back a layer of armor we wear in life. False pleasures, addictions, delusions, they all fall away when the soul begins to look inward. Dante's descent is a guided tour through the consequences of unconscious living, and for us, it's an invitation not to fear hell, but to understand it, to ask, where am I spinning in circles? What storms have I created by refusing to let go? Because hell, in Dante's eyes, is not eternal fire, it's the absence of transformation. The Inferno is not about sin as much as it's about stagnation, being stuck, repeating the same patterns, refusing to grow. And isn't that what so many of us fear most? Not dying, but never truly living. This journey downward is not meant to break the soul, it's meant to humble it. Because only when you've seen what you're capable of, both the light and the shadow, can you begin the climb back up. So Dante walks, he watches, he weeps, and with each circle he understands more about himself, about us, and perhaps that's the greatest act of courage. To descend into the dark, not to escape, but to see clearly, to see truthfully, to see yourself, not just the parts you like, but all of it. This is the work of the Inferno, and it is sacred. So as we continue through the circles, ask yourself, what are you ready to see? What truth are you ready to face? And are you willing to let go of the old hopes, the illusions, the comforts that once held you, so you can discover the deeper truth waiting in the dark? Because only by going down can we ever truly rise. And maybe the descent itself is the medicine. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your initiation. Just as Dante had to walk through every layer of hell, we too must walk through every disowned part of ourselves. Every fear we locked away, every wound we buried, every lie we told ourselves to feel safe. This is not easy work, but it is sacred work. The descent strips us of falsehoods. It reveals the architecture of our inner world, the hidden motivations, the quiet betrayals, the whispers we tried to ignore. It holds a mirror up to the soul and says, are you ready to see the whole truth? And perhaps more importantly, are you ready to love what you see, even if it's broken? Because hell is not just a place of torment, it's a place of revelation, of reckoning, and ultimately of return. So we descend, not to be damned, but to remember the cost of unconsciousness, to remember that even in our darkest moments, the soul is still reaching, still yearning, still capable of change. The Inferno begins with descent, but it is not the end of the story. It is the necessary first act in the greater comedy, the divine one, that leads us home. So keep going. The light you seek waits on the other side of the darkness you dare to face. And as Dante presses forward into deeper realms of consequence, so too do we deepen our gaze. With each soul encountered, we see more of ourselves. The Inferno is not a place we go to after death. It is a landscape of the human spirit, mapped by pain, ignorance, and the yearning for redemption. It is not just a warning. It is a mirror. And when we dare to look, really look, we find something unexpected, not despair but potential. Because to see the truth of the shadow is to glimpse the shape of the light. We now follow Dante deeper still. The spiral tightens. The shadows grow longer, and the temperature, contrary to expectation, doesn't always rise, because in Dante's hell, heat isn't the only form of torment. There are punishments of wind, of ice, of silence, of being seen, and of never being seen again. What Dante offers us now is not a fiery spectacle, but a descent into the human condition itself. With each circle, we don't just observe punishment, we are invited to examine the interior of our own souls. The circles we now enter are reserved for those who have misused their most powerful faculties, the mind, the will, the ability to choose. We begin to meet those who not only acted on desire or pride, but who planned, who manipulated, who distorted truth to serve the self. These sins are no longer born of passion alone, but of intention, of strategy. It begins with the fourth circle, the avaricious and the prodigal, those who hoarded wealth and those who squandered it. They clash endlessly, rolling great stones into one another, shouting in eternal opposition, each accusing the other of imbalance, neither satisfied, neither at peace. It's not a punishment of fire, it's the punishment of obsession, of never being satisfied, of being so consumed by either excess or lack that you miss the point of life entirely. Their actions echo the imbalance in their hearts, their failure to use resources in service of others or the divine order. Wealth becomes not a tool, but a trap. Dante is asking us, what do you chase? What do you hoard? What do you fear not having enough of? Where does your relationship with possession and value sit on the spectrum between excess and waste? What is your stone? And who are you crashing into? And then, in the fifth circle, we cross the river Styx. Here lie the wrathful, thrashing in the murky water, locked in perpetual combat. They beat each other with rage that has no end, no relief, no resolution. But more disturbing still are those beneath the surface, the sullen, those who suppressed their anger, who turned it inward, who said nothing, who did nothing, until that silence became its own form of violence. They lie gurgling beneath the surface, consumed by their own bitterness, unable to rise. Their words swallowed by a darkness they chose not to confront. This is Dante's brilliance. He's not just cataloguing crimes, he's illuminating conditions, states of being, emotional prisons. And he's reminding us, even passivity can have consequences. We often associate hell with action, with doing something wrong. But Dante's circles reveal that inaction, the refusal to engage with life, with truth, with our own capacity for change, can be just as damning. Virgil continues to guide Dante, not just physically but mentally, spiritually. He is reason personified, but even reason has its limits. Each encounter demands reflection. And then we reach the city of Dis, a turning point. Here we are no longer dealing with impulsive sins or unchecked passions. The sins beyond this gate are cold, calculated. These are the sins of reason twisted, of intellect betrayed, of mind used not to elevate but to deceive and destroy. Furies rise on the walls, angels are nowhere to be seen, and Virgil, the symbol of human reason for the first time, struggles to find a way through. This is important, because Dante is showing us that reason alone cannot guide the soul through every trial. There are places in the human experience where logic falters, where faith, grace, or divine assistance becomes necessary. We are entering territory that is not just psychological, but existential. Places where cold intellect has replaced warm humanity. And then we meet the heretics, those who denied the immortality of the soul. They lie in burning tombs. Think about that. Burning tombs. They are dead, and yet their denial of the afterlife becomes their prison. Their refusal to believe in the soul's continuity results in eternal confinement. The tomb, normally a place of rest, is here a source of torment. Dante is not punishing belief here. He's illustrating what happens when we reject the soul's continuity, when we live as though this life is all there is, and we sever our connection to deeper purpose. What tombs have we made for ourselves? What fires do we lie in? Not because we sinned, but because we forgot who we are. From here, the descent sharpens. The terrain grows darker, narrower, colder, more surreal, more confronting. The air itself seems to change, as though even the atmosphere is bearing witness to the weight of the sins below. We come to the circle of the violent. But violence in Dante's cosmology is not just physical harm. It is violence against others, against the self, and even against nature and God. This is the realm where the soul's relationship to existence itself is ruptured. Those who took their own lives, souls Dante regards with a heartbreaking mixture of pity and confusion, are now trapped as gnarled trees. Their speech only emerges when their branches are broken. It's a haunting metaphor that in life, when we silence our voice, when we despair so deeply we destroy ourselves, we may lose the very ability to speak our truth. Their pain is no longer just emotional, it's botanical, environmental, elemental. The forest is not just a setting, it's a soulscape, a living gallery of broken lives, and Dante walks through it with reverence, not judgment. These are not monsters. They are echoes of pain. Dante doesn't offer easy answers here. He doesn't condemn with glee. He approaches with awe, with sorrow. He's learning, he's opening. He is no longer simply a visitor. He is being transformed. And we are too. We begin to see this journey isn't about hell as punishment. It's about hell as consequence. Not imposed from above, but generated from within. Every soul Dante meets has become the architect of their own suffering. Their inner world, once ignored or distorted, has become their outer prison. The Inferno becomes a mirror, sometimes cracked, sometimes magnifying, of the self. We are being shown that what we do with our time, our emotions, our choices, they matter. Not because some cosmic judge is tallying up points, but because we are weaving the fabric of our own afterlife, our own peace, or torment. And in this way, Dante's Inferno is less about damnation and more about revelation. As we move deeper, the sins grow more complex, more intentional. The stakes rise, not because the punishment worsens, but because the interior truth becomes sharper, harder to deny. We will soon meet frauds, betrayers and deceivers, those who corrupted truth itself. But before we continue, take a moment. What truths have you turned away from? What emotions have you buried? What parts of yourself have you refused to see? Because this descent, like all descent, is not just going lower, it's about going inward. And the further in we go, the more we must ask, what false hopes have I clung to? What lies have I told myself? What stones have I been pushing? What voices have I ignored? Dante's journey is no longer his alone. It is ours. And just as he must walk through every circle to understand the shape of the soul, so too must we be willing to look, to truly look, at the shadows we carry. Because to see the full truth of ourselves, even when it hurts, is the first step toward healing. And healing, as Dante will show us, begins in the very place we least want to go. Deeper. Let us go deeper, because what waits at the bottom is not simply more darkness, but the moment everything begins to turn. As we continue our descent through the Inferno, Dante introduces us to one of the most complex and disturbing territories yet, the realm of fraud. This is not the brute violence of earlier circles, nor the impulsive sins of passion. This is something colder, sharper, more human, in a way that makes it harder to dismiss. Here the mind is not lost to madness, but employed with intention, maliciously, methodically, and perhaps that is what makes the circle more terrifying than any before. It is the realization that evil can be dressed in brilliance, that deception can wear the face of charm, and that those who betray are often those we once trusted the most. We are now within the 8th circle of hell, known as Meleboj, meaning evil ditches. A vast engineered landscape, divided into 10 concentric moats, each one dedicated to a different species of deception. It is architectural in its design, methodical in its execution, and that's the point. Fraud is not chaotic. It is constructed, carefully. It is manipulation with intent, truth weaponized for personal gain. Dante is suggesting that this kind of betrayal is uniquely destructive, because it perverts the very thing that binds human beings together, trust. We begin with the seducers and the flatterers. Not murderers, not thieves, but those who exploit the human heart for personal advantage. Their punishment? To be driven relentlessly, naked and lashed, or submerged in rivers of filth. Why such visceral imagery for what some might consider lesser sins? Because Dante understood something profound, that seduction and flattery, when hollow, are not acts of love, they are tools of control. These souls sold illusions, and now they are buried in them. These opening bolges remind us that not all destruction is loud or bloody. Some comes with a smile, with kind words that carry ulterior motives. The emotional toll of manipulation, of being made to question one's worth or sense of reality, leaves scars just as deep as any blade. Next come the simoniacs, those who sold sacred things for profit, churchmen who used religion as currency. Their feet are set ablaze as they are buried headfirst in rock, inverted mockeries of baptismal fonts. Dante spares no institution, no authority. He names names, popes, bishops, clerics. This is not merely a theological statement, it is a moral reckoning. Dante is holding the church itself accountable, insisting that corruption in high places is not only sin, it is sacrilege. He is asking, what happens when the very thing meant to guide us, our faith, our leaders, our institutions, becomes the source of deception? We pass through Bolgia after Bolgia, meeting sorcerers who twisted divine will, hypocrites who wore gilded cloaks lined with lead, thieves whose very identity is unstable, transforming grotesquely painfully in a reflection of the lies they lived. Each punishment is metaphor made manifest. Deceit is not punished arbitrarily, it is revealed. the sinner's inner truth becomes their eternal condition. But perhaps no section in this circle is as disturbing or illuminating as the pouch of the false counselors. Here we meet Ulysses, the legendary Greek hero, but Dante does not honor him. In fact, he condemns him, not for violence, not for pride, but for misusing his gift of speech, for using eloquence to lead others astray. This is one of the most telling moments in the Inferno, because Dante is reflecting on himself, on the power of words, on the responsibility of storytellers, poets, leaders. Ulysses is punished not because he lied, but because he inspired through distortion, because he elevated the intellect above the soul's integrity. This is not just a critique of ancient myth, it's a warning, a question posed to every artist, every thinker, every voice. Are your words guiding people home, or leading them off a cliff? And then, there's Guido di Montefeltro, a former military leader turned friar who is damned for offering deceptive counsel, even under the pretense of spiritual authority. His punishment? To be encased in flame, indistinguishable from the fire that consumed truth. This image of souls wrapped in individual flames is chilling, but it is also beautiful in its precision. These are not generalized depictions of hell. These are psychological portraits. They are insights into the ways human beings fracture themselves when they twist truth for personal gain. Each flame is a mind, isolated in its brilliance and its burn. As we cross these ditches, we begin to see the full moral structure Dante is revealing. Fraud is more grievous than violence, not because it causes more physical pain, but because it represents a deeper fall. It's the betrayal of reason, the abuse of the very faculties that make us human. Reason is a divine gift in Dante's cosmology. It is what allows us to choose, to love rightly, to recognize truth. When it is used to deceive, it collapses the bridge between souls, and when that bridge breaks, society falls. This is why fraud is placed so low in the Inferno, because it's not just personal failure, it is social corrosion. It's civilization undone from the inside. There is a temptation, even today, to dismiss certain lies as harmless, to see flattery, manipulation, gaslighting, or betrayal as unfortunate but not catastrophic. Dante says otherwise. He is reminding us that every lie carries weight, that every time we distort reality, for power, for safety, for gain, we add another stone to the architecture of hell. And then we approach the final Bolgia. The falsifiers. Alchemists, impersonators, counterfeiters, liars of the body and the tongue. Their punishment? Disease, rot, madness. They scratch endlessly at scabs that never heal. They suffer from thirst, from stench, from plague. It's grotesque, and intentionally so, because Dante is showing us that deception infects the soul, like disease infects the body. It spreads, it multiplies, it distorts until there's nothing left but pain. But because what's most striking is how recognizable these figures are, they are not monsters. They are us, taken to the extreme. They are the mirror we hesitate to look into. And that's the power of this segment. It's not about medieval theology. It's not about judgment. It's about what we become when we lose sight of truth. When we use our brilliance to blind, when we turn our gifts into weapons. Dante's Malebranche is not just a structure of punishment. It is a warning about the fragility of human connection, about how easily our greatest strengths, speech, logic, vision, can become the instruments of our fall. This is the anatomy of betrayal, not in grand gestures but in quiet justifications, in small compromises that pave the way for collapse, in eloquent lies that sound like truths. So before we enter the deepest pit, the ninth and final circle, where betrayal itself is frozen in place, we must ask ourselves, where have I compromised the truth? When have I chosen silence over integrity? What lies do I tell? About myself, about others, And most importantly, am I building bridges with my gifts or burning them? Because the soul, like a city, is held together by the integrity of its roads, its language, its trust. And when these collapse, the descent into darkness is no longer poetic. It becomes personal. Let us now prepare to face the deepest shadows. Because what lies ahead is not just the center of hell, it is the frozen heart of betrayal itself. We now stand before the final descent, the 9th circle of hell. But here, there are no roaring fires, no demons with whips, no rivers of boiling blood. Instead, there is silence. Cold, absolute, arresting. This is Chikhai, the frozen lake that forms the floor of the Inferno. A stark paradoxical end to a journey we might have expected to culminate in flames. But Dante understood something others did not. Evil in its most perfected form is not chaos, it is coldness. Chikhai is not simply a punishment, it is a mirror, one that reflects the deepest violation of all, betrayal. And betrayal, as Dante conceives it, is not merely about broken promises or lies, it is the severing of sacred bonds. It is love turned inward, compassion calcified into self-interest, trust melted into manipulation. Here the sinners are not merely wicked, they are traitors, and the depth of their punishment correlates with the depth of the trust they violated. The 9th circle is divided into 4 concentric zones, each one named for a different archetype of treachery. Cana, named for Cain, who slew his brother Abel, is reserved for traitors to family. Antenora, for traitors to country or political party, is named after Antenor of Troy. Ptolemaea, named for Ptolemy, who killed his guests at a banquet, houses those who betrayed their guests and benefactors. And Judeca, the innermost ring, is for the traitors to lords and benefactors, those who violated divine trust, those who betrayed the very fabric of order and grace. And it is here, in this quiet, icy crypt of the soul, that Dante places the greatest sinners of all. The frozen lake is not just symbolic, it's spiritual physics. Betrayal, Dante suggests, does not ignite, it extinguishes. It stops the flow of life. It arrests motion, silences the heart, paralyzes the soul. It makes the world and the self unmoved. To betray is to freeze. Here in Chikhai, Dante introduces us to some of the most haunting images in the entire Divine Comedy. Traitors buried up to their necks in the ice, eyes sealed shut by frozen tears, heads twisted backward in eternal shame, mouths gnashing endlessly, not in hunger but in anguish. The wind generated by Satan's wings perpetuates their imprisonment, solidifying the eternal cold that keeps them entombed. These are not mythical monsters. They are men, politicians, warriors, clerics, friends. They are familiar. In Cana, we see the unraveling of the most basic human relationship, the family bond. To betray one's blood is, in Dante's cosmology, a violation not only of moral law, but of the primal structure of love. The warmth of kinship turned to ice. What once should have been the core of security and care becomes a site of desolation. In Antenora, the cold grows deeper. These are the betrayers of homeland and comrades. Dante places Branca d'Ora here, alongside others who, out of ambition or fear, tore apart the shared trust that binds a people. These are those who, in pursuit of power, destroyed community. A soldier who betrays his general, a senator who undermines his republic. Loyalty in this frozen terrain is but a shattered relic of a world that once had order. And then comes Ptolemaea, a horrifying concept. Here lie the souls of those who murdered their own guests, those whom they were meant to shelter. But what's more chilling is this. According to Dante, some of these souls fall to hell before their bodies even die. The physical form continues, hollow and animated by evil, while the soul is already damned. Their earthly form continues on, possessed by demons. The soul is damned before the flesh ceases to breathe. Why? Because betrayal of hospitality, a sacred rite across cultures, is the very inversion of compassion. To offer a hand and strike with the other. To smile while plotting harm. It is evil made intimate. It is an embrace that conceals a dagger. And finally, Judaica, the deepest point, the still center of hell. The traitors to God. Those who betrayed their benefactors, their lords, the cosmic order itself. These are not merely political enemies. They are the fallen elite, the ones who had the highest trust and used it to destroy. And who reigns at the center? Lucifer, Satan, not roaring, not proud, but frozen. A massive monstrous figure imprisoned waist deep in ice, with 3 faces chewing eternally on the 3 greatest traitors in Dante's eyes: Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Christ, and Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Julius Caesar, thus symbolically betraying empire, order, and Rome. It's a striking inversion of the devil as we often imagine him. Not a ruler, but a prisoner. Not a flame, but encased. Here the ultimate rebel is the ultimate captive, his own pride turned against him. The flapping of Satan's wings, the very source of his grandeur, does not lift him but perpetuates his prison. The movement that should elevate only freezes the lake further. Every beat is an act of self-sabotage, a metaphor for the endless cycle of sin feeding on itself. This is a profound image, because it redefines evil not as something powerful, but as something powerless, locked in its own self-made solitude. Evil is not free, it is bound by its own nature. Satan is not a god of rebellion, he is the embodiment of futility. The deeper truth Dante offers here is that betrayal isolates, it silences, it cuts the soul off from everything that might save it: love, connection, grace. The circle becomes more than punishment. It is a psychological reality, a spiritual reflection of what happens when we choose disconnection over unity. And so, the lowest circle of hell is not hellish in the traditional sense. It is sterile, quiet, unmoving. Because what is more terrifying than suffering? Meaningless suffering. Dante is telling us that hell is not just pain, it is the death of movement, the end of hope, the sealing off of transformation, a final, eternal pause, and in that stillness, he holds up a mirror, not just to traitors of history, but to each of us. How often do we betray our own values? How often do we freeze out the vulnerable voices within us, or shut down the parts of ourselves that long for truth, honesty, connection? Hell then becomes internal. It is not a destination, it is a state, and betrayal is its chilling currency. And in a twist that reflects Dante's own emotional and spiritual journey, this is where he ends his exploration of sin. Not in fire, but in ice. Not with chaos, but with stillness. Because the heart of sin, Dante suggests, is not violence or lust or rage, it is the conscious severing of bonds, the rejection of trust, the refusal of grace. But even here in the lowest pit, there is motion, because this is not the end of the journey. After witnessing the frozen horror of Cocytus, Dante and Virgil begin their ascent, literally climbing down Satan's back and emerging through inversion into a new orientation. The world has flipped, and with it, a new possibility emerges. For now we have seen the depths of distortion, and we are ready to rise. But before we do, let us pause and reflect, not just on the figures frozen in Dante's ice, but on the spaces in our own hearts where movement has stopped. Where have we grown cold? Where have we withheld warmth, withheld trust, withheld truth? Have we betrayed not only others but ourselves? Because hell, in the end, is not just a punishment, it is a state of being. And heaven, as we will soon explore, is not merely a reward, it is a direction. So with the image of Satan frozen at the center of all sin behind us, we turn upward, toward the mountain, toward the climb, toward redemption, and most of all, toward transformation. Dante and Virgil have emerged from the silent pit of Cocytus, no longer descending, but climbing. Slowly, the gravity of hell gives way to something unfamiliar, the invitation to rise. What lies ahead is not salvation, but the beginning of transformation. This is a threshold between despair and renewal. This is purgatory. But first, something subtle, powerful, and easily missed. The world has turned upside down. Quite literally. In exiting hell, Dante experiences inversion. What was down is now up. What was dark is now dawning. It's a physical, metaphysical, and spiritual reorientation, a cosmic reset. And it's not quiet for long. Ahead looms a mountain, the mountain of Purgatory, towering vast and steep, but not ominous. This is not a mountain of punishment, it is a mountain of effort, the realm of possibility. Here, Dante steps into a space governed not by eternal sentence, but by sacred process. Every soul he encounters here is not damned, but becoming. And that's a shift worth pausing on. Unlike in hell, where every soul was fixed in its floor, the souls of purgatory are in motion. They carry burdens, yes, but those burdens are temporary, transformative. They are not weights of shame, but tools of refinement. Their pain has purpose. This is a landscape built not for the guilty, but for the willing. And this willingness is everything. The souls in purgatory choose to climb. They choose to heal. They are not forced to ascend. They long to. Their suffering is no longer punishment for past mistakes, but the purification of desire. This is not judgment, it is discipline. Not condemnation, but cleansing. Dante's journey now changes shape. The chaos of Inferno, with its brutal punishments and moral finality, gives way to rhythm, repetition, and ritual. Progress is possible, but not easy. There are no shortcuts on this mountain. And there's another change. Virgil, the voice of reason, once firm and directive, begins to recede. He does not disappear, but he softens. He listens more. He trusts Dante more. Because purgatory is not a place where reason leads. It is where the soul learns to walk on its own. This shift in guidance mirrors something deeper. Dante is no longer just being shown. He is now being shaped. The questions get harder, the terrain more internal. This isn't a tour, it's a transformation. Every terrace of the mountain corresponds to one of the 7 deadly sins. Not as crimes to be punished, but as conditions to be healed. Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, lust. Each soul climbing beside Dante embodies one of these shadows, not clinging to them, but working through them. And here lies one of the most radical ideas in the entire Divine Comedy, that sin is not a fixed identity, it is a pattern, and patterns can be broken. On the terrace of pride, for example, the proud must carry massive stones on their backs, bending them low. It's not torture, it's teaching. To ascend, they must learn humility not as a concept, but as a physical experience. Their posture changes because their inner posture must change. The mountain reshapes the soul from the outside in and the inside out. As Dante climbs, so do we. And with each level, we are asked to consider, what burdens have I chosen to carry? What am I willing to release? What part of me longs not just for forgiveness, but for renewal? Here, repentance is not a whispered prayer. It's a lived journey. It's sweat, it's patience, it's silence. Souls sing as they ascend, not in celebration, but in longing. They chant psalms, often prayers, not to beg for mercy, but to align with it. There is no fire here, only friction. And friction is not the enemy. It's the evidence of transformation. Dante learns this not in grand revelations, but in small moments. A humble soul speaks truth. A penitent stranger offers insight. He begins to listen differently, not just to words but to spirit. His ego softens, his questions deepen. And as he continues to rise, something else shifts, the pace. Unlike Inferno, where each circle pulled him downward with urgency, Purgatory allows pause, reflection. Dante lingers. He asks, he weeps, he waits. Because here, time is not punishment, it is grace. This segment of the journey invites us to look not at our sins but at our healing, not at what went wrong, but at what could be made right. It asks not for perfection but for participation. Are you willing to climb, knowing it will hurt, but also knowing it will heal? By the time Dante nears the summit, he has changed. He is not yet whole, but he is oriented. His heart has been stirred, his vision cleared, his weight lightened. And then comes the moment that makes Purgatory more than just a climb. It makes it a threshold. At the very top of the mountain lies the earthly paradise, a garden, a memory, a beginning, and waiting there is Beatrice. But before we step into that light, we must take one last breath on this mountain. Let its lessons root in us. Let its pace settle us. Let its grace undo us, because the journey of becoming is not behind us. It is just beginning. And the climb, difficult though it may be, was never punishment. It was preparation. For light, for love, for everything that comes next. So here we are. We've touched the bottom, the still, frozen silence of Chikhai. Satan behind us, ice beneath us, and something strange happens. We don't stay there. Dante and Virgil don't linger in that cold, motionless pit. They start climbing. Downward at first, but then upward. Through a strange inversion, the world flips, and with it, everything begins to change. This isn't just a movement through geography. It's a movement through meaning, a reversal, a recalibration. Something is shifting. And maybe that's the point. We talk a lot about rock bottom, about those moments when everything falls apart, when we feel stuck, numb, lost. Dante knew that terrain well. He built a whole underworld around it. But what he also knew, and what many forget, is that the moment of deepest darkness is also the moment when the climb begins. This is the turning point. The Inferno ends not with destruction but with direction. When Dante emerges from hell, he's not whole. Not yet. He's been through the worst of what the soul can endure, but he's not saved. He's simply ready to climb the mountain, ready to begin the real work. Because escaping hell is just survival. Ascending Purgatory, that's transformation. Now let's pause here, not just to acknowledge the shift in Dante's physical journey, but to really sit with what it means. Think about it. After hundreds of pages filled with fire, screams, grotesque creatures, and unimaginable punishments, there's quiet. There's movement. There's air. What changes isn't just location, it's tone. The language lightens, the pace slows. There's less judgment and more reflection. Fewer monsters, more moments of grace. Even Virgil's role begins to shift. He's still guiding but not lecturing, not condemning, because the soul that survives hell doesn't need condemnation. It needs guidance. It needs healing. This is where the story moves from retribution to restoration. And that should feel familiar. Because haven't we all had a moment like that? A breakup, a loss, a mistake so big it redefined us. We hit the bottom and somehow we didn't break, we bent, and we moved upward, towards some future we didn't fully understand yet. That's Dante crawling out of the Inferno. The shift from descent to ascent is spiritual physics. Hell was built on gravity, the soul falling deeper into itself, into ego, into isolation. But Purgatory is built on effort, on choice, on movement. Climbing is hard, it requires more than pain, it demands intention. And so, this is where the Divine Comedy transforms. It's no longer a tour of horror, it's a path of hope, of discipline, of growth. And that's what makes the epic so timeless. Because it's not just about judgment, it's about change. Dante doesn't climb because he's perfect, he climbs because he's willing to learn, to let go, to rise. That's the shift we are invited into now. And maybe we are meant to ask ourselves, what part of us is still frozen? What truth have we buried so deep it can't move? What part of us is ready, not to be punished, but to begin again? The climb begins not when everything is resolved, but when we finally say, enough. When we decide the old patterns, the old weight, the old pain don't get to define the next chapter. Dante knew this, that's why he doesn't give us a triumphant escape. There are no trumpets as he exits hell. No cheers, just dirt, darkness, climbing. But above him, faintly, barely visible, is something he hasn't seen in a long time. Stars. The Inferno ends with a single stunning line. And then we came forth, to see again, the stars. Not salvation, not enlightenment, just orientation. The first sign that there is light again, that the soul can still rise. So maybe this isn't just a moment in a book. Maybe it's a blueprint. Maybe Dante's slow emergence from the depths reminds us that hell isn't the end of the story. It's the middle, the place we pass through, not to be destroyed, but to remember who we are. And that's what makes this journey so human, because each of us at some point faces a personal Chikhaitis, a moment when we feel encased in shame or regret or numbness, and in these moments, Dante gives us something radical, a ladder. A reminder that we are not stuck, that even in the lowest pit there's a way out, and that the work, the real work, isn't in being perfect. It's in turning toward the climb, toward the light, toward the stars. This moment, the pivot, the subtle shift from descent to ascent, is worth sitting with. Because it's here that Dante quietly asks us to look at our own journey. Where are we going? What do we carry? Who do we trust to guide us now? And perhaps it's also here that we recognize something unspoken, that all along, the journey through the Inferno wasn't just about sin and consequence, it was about the courage it takes to face ourselves, to look into the mirror of our own lives, and admit what needs to change. It's a brave thing to climb, to confront not only the darkness we've witnessed, but the darkness we've harbored, to acknowledge how easy it is to descend, and how much strength it takes to rise. But that is precisely what Dante models for us, that even after seeing the worst, after witnessing betrayal, corruption, pride, wrath and despair, we are still capable of choosing the ascent, of seeking what lies above, of daring to become something more. In this new posture of climbing, the Divine Comedy ceases to be a tale of damnation and becomes instead a map of redemption. And in that map, we might just begin to recognize ourselves. So pause here, let it resonate, let it settle deep, because what comes next isn't just the second act of a poetic trilogy, it's a reminder that after the fall, there's always a rise. And sometimes rising isn't flashy, sometimes it's slow, quiet, a series of small brave choices stacked on top of each other. Choosing not to numb, choosing to reach out, choosing to face the next step instead of retreating. Dante's ascent shows us that redemption isn't a burst of light, it's a steady flicker that we follow up the spiral. It's messy, it's uncertain, but it's real and it's sacred. So wherever you are in your story, whether you are descending, sitting in the silence of your own Chikhaitis, or beginning to feel the strain of the climb, remember this: the stars haven't moved. They've just been waiting for you to look up. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all. That the journey isn't linear. It spirals, it circles, it backtracks. But as long as we are climbing, as long as we are willing to rise, we are still becoming. The mountain waits, the stars remain, and the next step is always yours to take. And in that next step lies the most sacred truth of all. We are not climbing to become someone else. We are climbing to return to ourselves, to the clearest, most honest version of who we've always been, beneath the fear, beneath the masks, beneath the wounds. Each foothold, each breath, each reach forward is not just an act of effort, it's an act of memory. The kind of memory that goes deeper than thought, the kind that whispers, "You were never meant to stay lost." So rise. Not perfectly, not quickly, just rise. As the mountain begins to rise in earnest, something remarkable unfolds, not just in the terrain of Dante's journey, but in the spirit of the narrative itself. We leave behind the cold echoes of despair and begin to ascend into something more subtle, more nuanced, a path of purification. This is the realm of Purgatory, and unlike hell, where everything was fixed, final and absolute, here things shift. Here things grow. Here the soul is not chained but chiseled. Every layer of darkness is slowly peeled back by the steady light of self-awareness. Dante's mountain is no ordinary climb. It's a symbol, a structure, a mirror. Every step he takes upward is a step inward. Each level carved into this sacred geography reflects not a punishment, but a process. An intentional unlearning, a conscious becoming, a metamorphosis not forced by wrath or despair, but embraced through grace and willingness. And that's what makes this part of the journey so radically human. Purgatory is less a sentence and more a sanctuary. It's the slow burn of metamorphosis, the gentle dismantling of falsehoods, a place where the soul is not condemned but considered, where healing happens in layers and redemption is not a reward but a reclamation of the self. Purgatory in the Divine Comedy isn't a place of torture, it's a place of effort. Souls here are not damned, they are hopeful. They are not lost, they are learning. There is pain, yes, but it's purposeful. There's suffering, but it heals. It's a transitional state, a divine classroom for the soul, designed not for eternal retribution, but for gradual, deliberate ascent. Let's pause and let that sink in. The souls in Purgatory are not perfect, but they are willing. And in Dante's world, that willingness is everything. Willingness to change, willingness to be humbled, willingness to carry the weight of their past, not as shame, but as a tool for transformation. And maybe that's what we've misunderstood for so long. Modern life often views growth through the lens of achievement. Progress is measured in results, milestones, optics. But Dante challenges that. He offers a vision of growth as repentance, not in the guilt-laden performative sense, but in the deeply honest act of seeing ourselves clearly, of understanding the ego's noise, the soul's whispers, and the delicate space between the two. Each terrace of Purgatory holds a different distortion of the soul: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, lust. But unlike in hell, where these traits were frozen in place, here they are named, faced, and worked through. Each soul climbs with a burden tailored to their struggle. Stones on their backs, smoke in their eyes, tears in their silence. And through that burden, they rise. That's the paradox. Weight as a path to lightness. Suffering not as punishment, but as purification. And as Dante climbs, something begins to change in him. It's subtle at first, moments of compassion, glimpses of humility, a deeper listening. He's not just witnessing this time, he's participating. The journey is no longer about avoiding consequence, it's about embracing change. He becomes both narrator and student, humbled by the sacred work of internal realignment. which begs a question we often avoid in our own lives. Do we want to be free, or do we just want to avoid pain? Purgatory says, you don't get one without the other. You want lightness, you must go through weight. You want peace, you must face the noise within. You want truth, you must walk through your illusions, not around them. And this applies to us now more than ever. We live in a world of quick fixes and surface solutions. But transformation, the real kind, asks more of us. It asks us to sit with discomfort, to be honest about what we've carried, to admit when we've turned away from truth. That's what purgatory is about. It's not glamorous, it's not immediate, but it's real. And it's here on this climb that we begin to see how healing happens. Not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of courage, in reflection, in intention, in taking one step, then another, up a mountain we didn't know we had the strength to climb. There is also a beautiful irony unfolding here. The higher Dante climbs, the more he sheds, not just sin but self-importance. The ego that once recoiled in hell now begins to dissolve. He starts to see himself as part of something greater, a soul among souls, a life among many. This humility doesn't weaken him, it frees him. Dante doesn't climb alone, Virgil is still beside him, but even that's changing. The guide who once dominated the journey now takes a quieter role, because the climb is no longer just about following, it's about choosing. Choice. That's the heartbeat of purgatory. Each soul here is here by choice. They chose to face themselves, to do the work, to become, and in that choice, they find dignity. Not despite their struggle, but through it. And that's the invitation extended to us too. So ask yourself, what if growth isn't about adding more, but shedding what no longer serves? What if the climb isn't about striving, but about surrendering to the truth of who we really are? Because in Dante's mountain, every step upward is less about proving something and more about remembering something essential, something buried but never lost. That we are capable of change, that we are worthy of light, that we are already, even in our imperfection, on the path. And just as Dante begins to feel the weight lift, so too might we. The wind shifts, the air clears, and for the first time in a long time, the soul, tired but hopeful, takes a breath. Upward. And we climb with him, not as spectators but as seekers. Each of us in our own way, ascending through the struggles we've known, the burdens we carry, and the hope we dare to hold. Because maybe, just maybe, this sacred mountain is not somewhere outside of us. Maybe it has always lived within. A mountain that doesn't demand perfection, but demands presence. A climb that requires no map, only honesty, and a light that was never gone, only waiting for us to look up and step again toward it. Toward a self that is waiting, toward a soul that still believes, toward a freedom not earned but remembered. And with every breath we rise, not because we have all the answers, but because we are brave enough to ask better questions. Not because we are free of sin, but because we are willing to confront it. Not because the path is easy, but because something in us knows the climb is worth it. So we keep going, we keep searching, we stumble, we falter, we rise again. And in doing so, we begin to understand what Dante already knew. That the journey through purgatory is not about perfection, it's about transformation. And that transformation is sacred. Step by step, layer by layer, moment by moment, we remember the light and we rise again and again and again. The summit of the mountain breaks through the last remnants of shadow, and something profound settles into the air. It's quieter here, not in sound but in presence. The noise of striving begins to fade. The burdens so carefully carried up every terrace feel lighter, not because they've vanished, but because something within has shifted. The soul, refined through trial, now breathes in something it hasn't fully known until now. Peace without condition. A peace not born from ignorance, but from understanding, from having seen the darkness and chosen again and again to walk toward light. And this, in many ways, is the entire promise of Purgatorio fulfilled. Not just redemption, but reclamation. This is the earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden in Dante's telling. Not a return to childish innocence, but a space of sacred memory, a place not untouched by pain, but untouched by sin. Here, nature breathes in harmony with spirit, water flows without resistance, trees sway without violence, time moves without urgency. The atmosphere is not one of euphoria, but of gentle recognition. Something within Dante, and perhaps within us, feels like it remembers this place, not from the pages of a book, but from a long-lost truth buried deep in the heart. And here something changes in the very structure of Dante's journey, not just in location, but in meaning. Because the climb, the cleansing, the slow strip of ego, it's all been building to this moment, and now it's time to let go. Virgil, who has been everything to Dante so far, his guide, his protector, his intellect, his voice of reason, his anchor in the chaos. Virgil, who led him through hell, walked beside him in the shadows of purgatory, and stood by him when the path was unclear. Virgil must now leave. And there's something devastating in that, not in dramatic collapse, but in the gentle finality of a mentor stepping back. Because Dante's next step isn't one that reason can take. It belongs to something else, something deeper, something more intimate than logic, something soul-born, something that lives in the language of spirit rather than syllogism. To Beatrice. The name echoes with more than romance. It carries the weight of ideal love, of spiritual longing, of divine inspiration. She's not a woman in the ordinary sense. She's a symbol, a force, the embodiment of divine wisdom and grace. And she will guide him from this point on. Where Virgil represented reason, Beatrice embodies revelation. Reason was the ladder, now comes the flight. The ascent not of intellect, but of intuition. But before she does, Dante must face something far more difficult than the sins of hell or the trials of purgatory. He must face himself. The scene is breathtakingly human. Dante sees Beatrice, and instead of joy, he feels shame. He cannot meet her eyes. Not because she is harsh, but because her presence makes all the ways he turned from truth suddenly visible. It's not punishment, it's exposure. A holy confrontation. And it hurts. Not because Beatrice inflicts pain, but because the light she holds makes every shadow clear. In this light, there is no room for rationalization or defense, only reflection. Beatrice does not cuddle him. She does not embrace him. She speaks with piercing clarity. She reminds him of his fall, from the calling he once knew, from the light he once followed. She holds up a mirror, not to wound him, but to awaken him. Because here's the truth. Transformation isn't complete until we acknowledge what we've abandoned. To truly move forward, one must have the courage to look back, not with longing or despair, but with the clear, unflinching eyes of self-reckoning. Beatrice is not interested in Dante's guilt. She wants his truth. She wants his ownership of that truth. And in that, she demands something almost radical in its beauty. Accountability as an act of love. A sacred sort of honesty that doesn't seek to punish, but to renew. In her gaze, failure is not damnation, it is invitation. A sacred invitation to step fully into the light, not as a stranger, but as someone who has finally chosen to come home to themselves. This moment, this confrontation, is one of the most emotionally charged passages in all of the Divine Comedy. Because it's not about grand cosmic retribution. It's about one soul standing before the embodiment of divine grace, finally facing the weight of his own choices. It's about owning the small betrayals that accumulate, the quiet moments of turning away from the path, the subtle decisions that pull us out of alignment with our highest self. It's about realizing that heaven cannot be entered by escaping your past, but by healing your relationship with it. We do not rise by forgetting, we rise by integrating, by letting the past become part of the sacred architecture of our becoming. Because even the darkest chapters can become foundations for light if we let them. Dante weeps, not the desperate weeping of fear, but the soft breaking open of a heart that has carried so much for so long. A soul stripped bare before something beautiful enough to break it and rebuild it. His tears are not weakness, they are proof of readiness. Beatrice demands truth, and Dante opposite, not in speeches but in surrender. He drinks from the waters of Lethe, the river of forgetting, but not to erase memory, to release the hold of guilt, to untether from the weight of his former missteps. This isn't forgetfulness, it's forgiveness. And only then, once the slate has been washed, not to hide the journey but to make space for something new, only then does Beatrice truly take her place as his guide. She is no longer just a vision on a pedestal, she becomes the compass by which Dante will navigate the divine. She is the divine feminine in motion, the soul's light incarnate. And the tone of the narrative changes again. Because we are no longer climbing, we are no longer seeking, we are now preparing to ascend. Paradise awaits. But before that, we are left with this lingering moment, the final beat of the human arc. A man who has walked through hell, ascended through suffering, faced himself and chosen truth. A man who understands, perhaps for the first time, that salvation isn't found at the end of a path. It's discovered in the turning of the heart toward light. A man reborn not by miracles, but by the quiet revolution of sincere repentance. And as Beatrice looks at Dante, she doesn't see the man who stumbled, she sees the soul who remembered. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of this entire journey. That at the edge of divine light, what prepares us isn't perfection, but the willingness to be known, the courage to be seen, the faith that even the most broken parts of us can be part of the return. We leave the garden, not as Adam once did in exile, but as Dante does in renewal. With a soul that has trembled but not quit, with a heart that has broken but not closed, ready to rise, to ascend toward the stars, to witness what lies beyond the veil of human striving, to finally walk not toward light, but within it. And perhaps the most astonishing part of all, we are invited to come along. Because the garden was never lost, it has always waited, and now the gate opens, not just for Dante, but for us. If we too are willing to turn, if we too are ready to remember, if we too are willing to say goodbye to the voices that no longer serve us and follow the ones that call us home. Here is a sensation one feels when rising beyond what they believed was the peak, a subtle, trembling awe that suggests there is still more, always more. This is where Dante now stands, not at the end, but at the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. Paradise. And not the paradise of simple pleasures or worldly comforts, but a realm of harmony so absolute, it rewrites the very nature of perception. This is the beginning of the Paradiso, the final act of the Divine Comedy, and the most abstract, most luminous, most challenging leg of the journey. But this is no longer a journey of purification. It is a journey of illumination. The ascent begins not with movement but with vision. With Beatrice as his guide, Dante lifts his eyes and is pulled into the celestial spheres. The heavens open, not with thunder but with order, structure, a cosmic architecture that mirrors divine will. Every planet, every star, every orbit sings in harmony. This is a universe not ruled by chaos, but by love, the gravitational force of the divine. And yet, what Dante is seeing is not beyond him. It is not external, it is within him. This is perhaps the most startling realization of the Paradiso. The divine is not something we approach like a castle on a distant hill. It is something we uncover, layer by layer within the self. As Dante moves through the spheres, he is not journeying outward but inward. Each level of heaven peels away another illusion. Each saint he meets, each question he dares ask, serves not to teach him something new, but to remind him of something buried. Truth is not given here, it is remembered. Beatrice, more radiant now than ever, is not a passive guide. She is an interpreter of light. Each realm they pass through represents a different aspect of divine justice, divine grace, divine intellect. Dante encounters historical figures, theologians, warriors, mystics, but they are not there to impress him. They are there to challenge him. They press against the boundaries of what he believes about faith, fate, and freedom. One of the most potent encounters happens in the sphere of the sun, where the great theologians dwell. Here, Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure, figures from opposing religious orders, speak not in rivalry, but in harmony. Their wisdom does not compete, it completes. This is a realm where contradiction becomes complement, where difference is not division, but design. And this speaks to something deeply relevant. In a world fractured by dualities, Dante is being shown a third way. Not compromise, but transcendence, a path where intellect and spirit, law and mercy, tradition and transformation are not enemies but partners. The deeper Dante travels into the heavens, the less he understands in a rational sense, and the more he sees. His journey becomes increasingly symbolic, increasingly luminous. Language itself begins to falter. The poem pushes against the limits of speech. What does it mean to witness the divine? To see God not as an idea, but as a living, burning presence? And here, Dante does something remarkable. He admits that he cannot fully describe what he sees. Even as he strains language to its most poetic ends, he confesses its insufficiency. The divine cannot be captured by syllables. It can only be hinted at, and in that humility, that poetic surrender, Dante teaches us something vital, that the holiest truths are not those that are shouted, but those that silence us. Awe is not the absence of thought, it is the fullness of presence. One of the most stirring motifs in this section is light. Light not as metaphor, but as medium. Everything in the celestial spheres is radiant. Every soul shines, every truth glows, and yet this is not blinding, it is clarifying. As Dante adjusts to each level, his vision expands. It is not that heaven changes, but that he does. His capacity to receive grows. This is perhaps the most revolutionary idea in the Paradiso, that divine truth is not withheld. It is always shining, but we must become the kind of being who can behold it. And so the work of the soul is not to earn the light, it is to become the light. There is a tenderness in these revelations, a quiet kind of courage, because Dante is not just describing heaven as a theological end, he is describing the awakening of consciousness, the realization that divine reality is not reserved for saints and angels, it is the destiny of all who are willing to be transformed by love, As we journey with Dante, we begin to notice something. The heavens are not static, they are music. The entire cosmos pulses with rhythm, the stars, the souls, the silence between them, all part of a grand eternal harmony. And we, too, are meant to take our place in that symphony. This is not a hierarchy of power, it is a choreography of grace. And it demands of us one thing: to listen. Not just with our ears, but our being. Because the music of the divine is not an external soundtrack, it is an invitation to tune our lives to a higher frequency. A frequency where joy is not escape, but truth. Where justice is not retribution, but restoration. Where love is not sentiment, but structure. As Dante rises through the final spheres, he enters realms increasingly beyond form. Here reside the saints, the apostles, and the highest ranks of angelic beings. They are not distinct personalities in the traditional sense, they are flames of love vibrating in perfect unity. Each expresses an aspect of divine will, and Dante finds himself absorbing truths not through argument or lecture, but through presence. He meets St. Peter, St. James, and St. John, symbols of faith, hope, and love. Through them, Dante is tested, not judged but weighed. How strong is his vision? How steady his spirit? How open is his heart? These aren't the tests of doctrine, but of being, and in passing them, Dante is not rewarded. He is readied. The final ascent is toward the Empyrean, the realm outside space and time where God dwells. Here Dante beholds a great river of light, a celestial rose, and souls seated in petals like sparks of eternal joy. This is the true climax of the comedy. Not hell's fire or purgatory's climb, but a silence so full it resounds. And then the final vision, the beatific vision. Dante sees the source of all things, the unmoved mover, the love that moves the sun and other stars. But he sees it not as a bearded deity, nor as a ruler on a throne, but as a blinding, perfect light. Within that light, he glimpses the image of humanity, the reflection of himself, of all of us, unity, oneness, home. He cannot describe what he saw, he can only say that it moved him beyond will, beyond thought, beyond self. In that moment, Dante the pilgrim becomes Dante the poet. Not because he understands more, but because he has surrendered completely. And that is the essence of the Divine Comedy's final gift. Not clarity, but communion. Not explanation, but transformation. The journey ends not with arrival, but with awakening. And if we've followed closely, if we've let ourselves be drawn into the spiral of descent, ascent, and transcendence, then perhaps we too are left not with answers, but with a longing, a quiet stirring to rise, to remember, to return. Because the Divine Comedy was never just Dante's story. It was always meant to be ours.